Most Christians feel the tension. You love God. You believe the gospel is the greatest news ever told.
But when it comes to actually talking about it, especially with someone who doesn't share your beliefs, everything inside you tightens up. You start thinking, what if they think I'm judging them? Or what if I say the wrong thing and push them away? That hesitation isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. And for many believers, it becomes a reason to stay silent. We've been told for years that we should be bold, that we need to stand up for our faith no matter what. And while that's true, somewhere along the way, boldness became confused with being confrontational. And silence? That became the safe alternative. So now, a lot of believers live in that weird middle ground, afraid to speak up, but guilty for staying quiet. It's not because we're ashamed of the gospel. It's because we don't know how to speak without sounding forceful or fake. The truth is, most people aren't rejecting Jesus. They're rejecting the version of him that was handed to them through awkward conversations, half-hearted sales pitches, or emotional manipulation. And honestly, can you blame them? Nobody wants to feel like a project. Nobody wants to feel like they're being targeted for conversion. That's not how Jesus treated people, and it shouldn't be how we do it either. There's a better way. A way that doesn't compromise truth, but also doesn't sacrifice kindness. A way that's honest without being harsh. It's not about dumbing down the message or being overly politically correct. It's about remembering that the gospel is good news, good enough to speak for itself when we deliver it the way Jesus did, with compassion, patience, and wisdom. If sharing your faith has ever left you feeling misunderstood, dismissed, or even ashamed afterward, you're not alone. That experience is more common than people admit, especially among sincere Christians who want to do it right. But that discomfort doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It might mean your heart is sensitive enough to seek a better way, a more Christ-like way. Because sharing your faith shouldn't feel like forcing something onto someone. It should feel like offering something valuable, something deeply personal and life-giving. And when we shift our approach from pressure to presence, we begin to reflect Jesus in a way people actually want to hear, not because we're perfect speakers, but because we're authentic followers. When we look at how Jesus shared truth, one thing stands out immediately. He never forced anyone to believe. He spoke clearly, yes. He spoke with authority, absolutely. But he never manipulated. He never pressured. He never begged for agreement. Instead, Jesus trusted the power of truth, and he trusted the timing of the heart. That's a radical model of faith sharing, especially in a world that often values quick results over deep relationships. Think about the woman at the well in John 4. Jesus knew her history. He knew her pain. He didn't open the conversation by confronting her sin or reciting a list of commandments. He started with something simple. Can I have a drink? A question, a connection point, a human moment. From there, the conversation naturally opened, and truth was revealed, but only after trust was established. Jesus wasn't trying to win an argument. He was offering living water. This pattern repeats throughout his ministry. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, basically a corrupt traitor in the eyes of his people. And yet Jesus didn't stand below the tree and shame him. He said, "Come down. I'm going to your house today." That invitation led to transformation. Jesus didn't use force. He used presence. And that presence broke through defenses no sermon ever could. We forget that people aren't just minds to convince, they're souls to care for. That's what Jesus did differently. He saw the person behind the posture. He understood that behind every hard heart is a hurt one. And when we begin to see people that way, evangelism stops being about delivering a message and starts becoming about building a bridge. When you try to convince someone of your faith, you often activate their resistance. But when you live and speak with love, you create curiosity. People begin to wonder what's different about you, why you don't panic when life is chaotic, why you respond gently instead of lashing out. And that curiosity opens the door for deeper conversation, not because you pushed it open, but because they invited you in. Jesus trusted the power of seed planting. Not every person he encountered followed him. Not every conversation ended in conversion. But every encounter was full of dignity and love. That's what we're called to do. Not to close the sale, but to faithfully plant seeds, trusting that God is the one who makes them grow. One of the biggest changes you can make in the way you share your faith is this. Stop trying to present a message and start sharing your experience. People may argue theology, doctrine, or morality, but what they can't argue with is your story. When you say, "Here's what God did in my life," you're not preaching at them. You're opening a window, and windows invite light. That doesn't mean you need a dramatic testimony to make an impact. Maybe you didn't hit rock bottom. Maybe you didn't have a road to Damascus moment. That's okay. Sometimes the most powerful testimonies are quiet ones. The story of steady peace in the middle of stress, or the story of how God helped you forgive someone you never thought you could. These are the things people relate to, not theological debates or spiritual jargon. The second shift is this. Let people ask. You don't need to anticipate every objection or dump a full explanation of the gospel in the first conversation. If someone sees something different in you, let their curiosity do some of the work. You might be surprised how often people say things like, "You just seem grounded. What's your secret?" That's not a cue to recite a script. That's a door cracking open. Walk through it with gentleness. Many Christians feel a burden to get it right. We think if we don't say everything perfectly, we'll mess it up. But that mindset often leads to forced conversations that feel more like interviews than relationships. Instead of worrying about the perfect phrasing, aim for genuine presence. People know when you're trying to get somewhere, but they also know when you're simply being real with them, and that's far more impactful. Another practical change? Speak from questions, not from conclusions. Instead of saying, "You need Jesus," consider asking, "Do you ever think about God?" Or, "Has faith ever been part of your story?" These kinds of questions don't corner people. They create room. They invite someone to reflect, rather than forcing them to respond. That space allows trust to grow, and when trust grows, truth has room to land. Ultimately, the goal isn't to win a spiritual debate, it's to reflect Jesus. And Jesus wasn't in a hurry. He listened more than he lectured. He met people where they were, not where he wished they'd be. If we want to share our faith without being pushy, we need to follow that same rhythm, steady, sincere, and full of grace. The most powerful witness isn't your argument, it's your life. People may not remember every verse you quote, but they will remember how you made them feel. They'll remember if you listened without judgment. They'll remember if you were kind when you had every reason not to be. And they'll remember if your faith was something they could feel, calm, steady, and real, even before you ever brought it up. This is what it means to be salt and light. Salt doesn't shout. It simply changes the flavor of everything it touches. Light doesn't argue. It just shows up and makes things clear. When Jesus said to let your light shine before others, he didn't mean to force it in their eyes. He meant, let it be visible, undeniable, and quietly beautiful, so that people see something in you they can't explain. There's a difference between being bold and being loud. Boldness is confidence in God. It's calm, unshakable, and full of love. Loudness, on the other hand, is often insecurity in disguise. It's when we try to prove something instead of trusting that truth speaks for itself. When you live with bold humility, people notice. And more often than not, they're drawn in, not pushed away. It's okay if someone doesn't immediately respond to what you share. That doesn't mean you failed. In fact, sometimes the seeds you plant will take years to grow. And that's not wasted time. It's faithfulness. Real love doesn't demand instant results. It shows up again and again and trusts God with the outcome. You don't need to preach on street corners or memorize theological answers to be a witness. What you need is to walk with Jesus genuinely, and let that journey overflow into your relationships. Let people see what peace looks like under pressure. Let them see what forgiveness looks like when it's hard. Let them see that following Jesus isn't just a belief system, it's a way of being. Because at the end of the day, sharing your faith isn't about having all the right words. It's about living a life that makes people wonder about the source. And when they ask, not because you pressured them, but because they saw something different in you, then you'll know you didn't push. You reflected.